The headline screams war, but the military action is a surgical strike, not an invasion. Why would two superpowers attack oil tankers in the Strait of Hormuz without declaring total war? The answer lies in economic statecraft. This isn't about regime collapse, it's about weaponizing global oil prices to force Tehran into negotiations while keeping China from intervening and avoiding World War III. When leaders announce attacks on commercial vessels, the immediate instinct is to read a morality play or a prelude to ground troops. But if we look at the incentives rather than the rhetoric, a different strategic logic emerges. The United States and Israel are not trying to topple the Iranian regime through kinetic force alone. They are attempting a high-stakes game of economic leverage designed to spike global oil costs without triggering a direct military confrontation between major powers. This is a calculated escalation where the battlefield has shifted from the rugged terrain of Iran's borders to the volatile markets of international trade, forcing Tehran into a corner using financial pain instead of land wars that would require thousands of casualties and potentially draw China into an open conflict. To understand why this approach was chosen over total war, we must look at the mechanics of what is happening in the Strait of Hormuz. Following attacks on commercial vessels like the Frontline and Kokuka Courageous, starting around March 2, a strategy of ambiguity took hold. Iran utilized plausible deniability tactics involving mines or small craft to create a risk premium that spikes crude costs globally. This allows Tehran to exert pressure without crossing the threshold into open warfare that would invite overwhelming retaliation from Western forces. The goal is not to destroy the Iranian government, but to make the cost of their current policies so high through economic disruption that they seek negotiations on terms more favorable to Washington and its allies. Quick resource note: I keep a curated set of Amazon search links in the description for books, gear, and tools relevant to this channel's topics. Some are affiliate links, so I may earn a commission at no extra cost to you. Please consider supporting the channel by using those links if you find something useful. The severity of this blockade becomes clear when we examine the traffic data rather than just the headlines. Since March 4, only 187 vessels have successfully transited the strait under highly restricted conditions. This number is a fraction of pre-war levels for such a critical choke point where roughly a quarter of global oil flows normally pass through daily. Even during brief windows of attempted reopening, control remained tenuous. For instance, between April 17 and April 20, only 13 tankers successfully made it through the strait despite a declared closure order from Tehran. This data illustrates that while there is no total naval blockade in the traditional sense, the threat environment has been calibrated to make transit dangerous enough to drive up insurance rates and shipping costs globally without requiring a full-scale invasion force on the ground. This strategy relies heavily on how global markets react to supply disruption fears rather than actual physical shortages alone. Global crude oil prices rose by 4% immediately following the attacks due to these disruptions, proving that the mere threat of closure is as potent as an actual one. Even though United States petroleum imports have decreased significantly in recent years, Americans still pay higher global prices because crude oil is a globally traded commodity. A barrel refined in Europe or Asia affects fuel costs everywhere. The attackers generate this risk premium to pressure Western economies economically while avoiding the costly land wars that would be necessary for regime change through force of arms. This shifts the advantage away from Iran's terrain-based defenses and toward U.S. structural leverage over global pricing mechanisms. However, no strategy involving such a critical waterway can succeed without managing the great power dynamics at play. The Chinese factor is perhaps the most silent but vital component of this entire operation. Over half of the successful transits are handled by shipping firms from just 4 countries, with China leading due to diplomatic pressure on Tehran. This highlights that Beijing is actively managing its energy security interests without triggering a direct United States-China military clash over the strait. If Washington were to launch an all-out invasion aimed at regime collapse, it would almost certainly force Beijing into open confrontation or severe economic retaliation, as more than half of China's oil imports pass through this same narrow channel. By keeping the conflict limited to targeted strikes and price manipulation, both sides avoid crossing a line that would drag them into a wider war they cannot afford. The strategic logic here is one of restraint born from self-interest rather than moral hesitation. The United States has achieved its objective not by destroying infrastructure or occupying territory, but by creating a financial crisis that forces Tehran's hand through economic pain. This changes the fundamental nature of the conflict because it shifts the battlefield to global markets where the U.S. holds structural leverage over oil prices, an area where Iran lacks comparable influence. A land war in Iran would be a quagmire with uncertain outcomes and high human costs, whereas this calibrated approach allows Washington to signal resolve without committing to an open-ended occupation or triggering a broader geopolitical collapse that could draw China into direct hostilities. The result is a tense equilibrium where the threat of total violence remains on the table but is never fully unleashed. The attacks serve as a constant reminder of what happens if negotiations fail, while the continued flow of oil through Chinese and other non-hostile vessels demonstrates that the world economy can still function under this new reality. It is a lesson in modern statecraft where economic tools are often more precise than military ones for achieving political goals without crossing into catastrophic escalation. The conflict continues to be defined by these calculated moves rather than sweeping declarations of victory or total defeat, leaving both sides waiting to see which side blinks first under the pressure of rising global prices and diplomatic isolation. Thanks for watching all the way to the end. I am a one-person team working hard to make each video better than the last. Subscribe if you found value. It is the best way to show support. Drop a comment with your biggest takeaway. See you in the next video.